You have been to the home of this little girl. When you got there, what did they tell you happened?
Good evening and thanks for having me. You know, I think when we got to the home of the mom, her parents' home, they were a bit confused as well. I think there is no parent that would want that to happen to his or her child. Even a grandmother or a grandfather wouldn't want that to happen. But the community was also there, and they explained to us that this was continuously happening to this little child. And that the person that did that to her was someone that was out on parole for rape. So he was not a first-time offender. And is also 13 years older than her, than the mom, which means it's statutory rape on its own. And then obviously raping the little child. And this has been continuously happening. And I do believe that, you know, we've reached a point in South Africa where we cannot any longer stand for this. We cannot be campaigning. We cannot be running around with placards. We could not be talking and having workshops on this. We cannot keep on saying, teach the boy child, teach the girl child, but we need to do something. People like this need to stay behind bars. People like this do not have to get bail. People like this, and I repeatedly said it needs to go to Pakistan, that prison, and remain there underground. They should not be seeing the sun coming up. They should not be seeing the sunset. They should not see the beautiful moon come up. They should not be part of society. We cannot allow for no action against these guys. How long are we going to educate them? How long are we going to go out and use money for seminars and you name it? We cannot have this. But I think it's the mom that ran away must have been scared. Because we also realized that both of them are on drugs. And obvious, when you're on drugs, sometimes don't even know what you're doing. So I believe that we need to treat this young girl. We need to assist her so that she can recover and become rehabilitated. Can you imagine any mother allowing this to be done to a child? My only thing that I take away is she was scared. She could not fight this. She cannot even call him an animal. But I'm sure she could.
Dr. Shahida, I'd like to bring you into this conversation. It's certainly a difficult one to have because I think all of us are mothers, you know, and we're thinking about this little girl at only 2 years old having to endure such difficulties. But also here's a mother who's 17, who's, as the MMC says, is on drugs. And surely, as she ran away shortly after this, it's something that, you know, a lot of community members that were coming out in recent days have been blaming her, have been saying that she's been silent at, you know, this continuing to happen. But we cannot look at it in isolation when it comes to her own trauma, even as a child sleeping with someone who is 14 years older than her.
Bongiwe, you've highlighted something so critical and pertinent here. We're talking about a minor. We're talking about a 17-year-old who is a child who actually is still in need of a mother, who needs mothering, who needs care, who needs support, protection, love, security. And the relationship with a much older man is actually reflecting on unmet emotional needs. I think this is something that we need to look at. Well, the MMC spoke about self-destructive behavioral patterns of substance abuse. also echoes and confirms that this is a girl in grave need of emotional, psychological support. It's very easy to resort to a label and say she's an alleged perpetrator, that she's a colluder, and that she's, has done nothing to protect her child. I think this requires a lot more, intensive attention. And of course, this young girl is actually crying out for help. The unmet needs and the way she's responding to situations. I think we also need to understand that this is not just the only child she has.
Yeah.
So a child having other children, a child who should actually be mothered and who needs support is obviously in grave need. And that is what we need to address. And I like what the MMC spoke about, that we need to reach out and see what is it that she's crying about. Because behind this so-called bad girl or mad girl, there's probably a very sad child who needs and is in desperate need of intervention, psychosocial support. One actually doesn't know her past, her history of trauma, her experiences. We know that a lot of children who have been victims of trauma are likely to act out in ways that one cannot make sense of. And that is what I want to actually reach out and say, that this bad child or mad child is not bad or mad, but maybe very, very hurt and, a very sad child that we actually need to look and see how best to help her, instead of taking the key and locking her up and thinking that's the solution. That's not the solution.
And MMC, there's been some, that have said in the community that, her grandmother may not have reported some of these assaults because the family in and itself is living in poverty, and therefore they are finding themselves on the back foot, in fact, when it comes to quite a lot of the issues. When you were talking to the grandmother, what did she say to you were some of the impediments, to her reporting this? And also just being able to assist her daughter, because certainly from what you have described as well, it does look like this was a cry for help.
Yeah, thanks, Bongi. I think, when we were there, because we were there with the MEC of community safety, together with the MMC of social development in the city of Johannesburg. Bongi, I have never seen a mother so devastated. I've never seen a mother not able to speak. And that spoke volumes. Because that grandmother could only say thank you to government for coming out. And you could see inside of that mom was crying and she was actually saying to us, I failed my child. I failed my grandchild. I failed my daughter. Because you must also remember, when you're in these circumstances, you are unable to speak out. You are scared to go to the law. You are scared to speak to anybody because you are also going to be blamed. Bongi, I think you only understand this if you've been a survivor of GBV, if you've been in that situation, if you've gone through that type of trauma. It's not always easy to speak out.
Yeah.
And as you've said, the poverty is there. You could see that poverty is there. And it speaks, it smells, you see it. Everything says poverty is here. And everything says we need to help this family. So, and what I'm saying is I'm speaking out of experience. I didn't have my kids raped, but I'm from there. And I know what it is if someone holds you and you cannot get out there.
Dr. Shahida, when you listen to what the MMC has to say, especially talking about just, poverty and how difficult things are in that particular family, it tells you then that it's not just about the grandmother, in fact, the mother that is going to need help here. There's also a grandmother who has to raise the other children, who has to try and even protect her own little girl, who is only 17 years old from further harm, should the justice system, for example, decide to let her go. So surely there's going to be quite a lot that this grandmother, who herself appears to be battling, is going to have to deal with.
Indeed, and I think what we need to look at is it's a systemic approach to support and intervention. It's not just looking at the individual, but the individual is part of a bigger system, a family, a network. And if we look at the poverty situation, the risk factors are very high. The reality is that there's a lot of need, not only in terms of emotional and psychological needs, but even the basic needs of food and shelter, etc. And I think you cannot self-actualize somebody until you've unpacked all the needs and identified all the risk factors and the protective factors. And if we look at the relationship here, the dynamic of power and control, the male boyfriend being much older, having a hold, the emotional hold, the grip that he has. And of course, victims usually identify with the aggressor. I think typical of Stockholm syndrome as well. And, we cannot tell because of many other needs that he may have fulfilled for the victim would probably hold her to, remaining beholden to him. And I think this is where, on different levels, the other children, she as a child, the grandmother, the family, and even stakeholders, role players would have to intervene, whether it's health, it's social development, it's justice, because she's still a minor, so she doesn't fall under the she still falls under the Children's Act, and it would be, I think a travesty of justice just to put her into prison or to put her through the regular criminal justice processes, because that would only induce secondary victimization and trauma, and we would not be giving a child a second chance in life. That is what the Child Justice Act speaks to, creating an opportunity for rehabilitation, for the intervention and reintegration and preservation of families according to the Children's Act.
Certainly a difficult conversation to have tonight, especially when you look at, a 2-year-old who has now lost her life, allegedly being raped and also being assaulted, and certainly a very difficult, case to fathom, particularly, as we look at the country, being in the 16 days of activism against no violence against women and children. Thank you so much for your time tonight. That was Dr. Shahida Omar, who's the director of the Teddy Bear Clinic, and we were also in conversation with the City of Johannesburg's MMC for Community Development, Margaret Arnolds.